Hey everybody, I'm David with Bolivar Live. Well, as I've been talking about, we're going to start a 4-week series, and it may go into a 5-week series about the Bolivar Lighthouse. I'm here with Amy Maxwell Chase, and she's president of the foundation, which is a nonprofit, but we've got this broke down into 4 shows. This being the first one. The first 2 shows are going to be strictly on the history about the Bolivar Lighthouse, its trials and tribulations. And then the last 2 shows is actually going to be talking about the foundation, how it was formed, why it was formed, and where they're at, and what their plans are for our icon of beauty here on Bolivar Peninsula. So, Amy, this show is all about the start of the history.
Awesome.
Let's hear about it, because
Awesome.
I know you've got a great spill.
I do. So what's really interesting, David, is that for many, you guys coming on the peninsula, many don't know this is actually the 3rd lighthouse that was built on the property. The first lighthouse was actually built in 1852. It was cast with actually red panels. It was 75 feet tall, and the lens wasn't very bright. They said the harbor pilots out there, they complained, and so they put in a brighter 3rd order Fresnel lens. And that lighthouse stood proud, bringing ships in through the ship channel. And then it was dismantled in the 1860s during the Civil War. And they used the material as armamentarium. And interestingly enough, there's never been a piece of the original iron that's ever been found from that first lighthouse. So then in 1865, a second temporary wooden little lighthouse was built. It was about 40 feet tall. It had a 4th order Fresnel lens. And when you're talking about Fresnel lenses, there's 5 of them. There's a 1st order, which is the largest, down to the 5th, which is the smallest of the Fresnel lens. So they put a 4th order Fresnel lens in there, and it stood as a temporary tower at 40 feet tall. And then in 1872, this is when Congress appropriated $40,000, and you see the lighthouse that was built here today. So in the making of an icon, it was incredible, because when you stop and you think, David, that back in 1872, there were no channel markers.
Right.
There were no jetties. There was nothing. There was just this fabulous lens that was bringing in immigrants. Galveston was the Ellis Island of the South. So you think about this, and you think about how many, thousands of people that came in by boat, and it was just because of this lighthouse, because there was nothing there. It really is just a story of magnitude of just how incredible that this lighthouse is. So she did turn 151 years old this year, which is truly incredible to think that something was built, 151 years ago is still standing strong and tall and mighty. But you think again, this lighthouse provided for that safe passageway for the ships to come into Houston, Galveston, Texas City, the intercoastal waterways. So in the making of this incredible icon, William F. Crowe and Company of Galveston were the ones that were constructed, that were brought in to construct the dwellings and the homes. The new tower was painted black and white with horizontal day bands, day marks, and so that's how the pilots and the ships coming in could see from navigation with these day marks. And it was considered one of the most beautiful and efficient lighthouses on the Texas Gulf Coast. And I love to tell this story. So the first 2 lighthouse, the keeper and the assistant keeper, apparently were quite the motley crew. They were known for being inept, drunk, partially demented, and one even exposed himself allegedly to the passengers on the Gulf and Interstate train that came down the tracks that came right in front of the lighthouse.
And a lot of people don't know the railroad tracks ran along 87. They're in front of the elementary school, right in front of the lighthouse. And Bolivar was once the watermelon capital of the South.
Absolutely, absolutely. So as that Gulf and Interstate train came, I can only imagine that David, this assistant keeper, apparently, again, exposed himself to the passengers amongst other things. So at this point, both were removed from service. And then that's when they brought in Harry Claiborne, who was considered to be the most efficient and the best lighthouse keeper in the region. And he was over in Louisiana at the Twin Lighthouse, which is past de la Tre over in Louisiana. And they brought he and Virginia over. And Virginia, his wife, talked about how lonely and desolate and quiet. Can you imagine? There was nothing here. So they say that she read a lot of books, that she swept the stairwell many a time. and that she would clean the glass at the top of the lighthouse to pass the time. And that was all until the 1900 storm hit. And as we all know, that is the deadliest natural disaster in the United States history. The lighthouse safely withstood 120, raging winds, and it actually housed 125 refugees that Harry Claiborne got in safely, many of whom had waded through waist-deep water. And actually that morning, the Gulf and Interstate train had left Beaumont that morning, headed for Port Bolivar. And as the storm was rolling in, it is said that there were 9 brave passengers that got off that train and waded in the waist-deep water that got in. And those were some of the 9 that survived that train ride, which is really incredible. And David, I'll say in all this, we received a phone call years ago now from a gentleman that said, what about this Bolivar Point Lighthouse and what are y'all doing? Because I've got a story for you. And his great-grandmother was 3 years old when the 1900 storm hit. And basically they said his parents had basically swam her in as one of the last getting in. And, he said, Pete, she told the stories of, just how the sounds, the noises, the everything of how, I can only imagine what that storm must have been like riding it out in the lighthouse. But he said, you realize had she not, I wouldn't be here today.
Yeah.
So it's incredible stories like that to hear descendants of families that have ridden out various hurricanes over the years, that being, the 1900 storm. So as if that wasn't enough, then there was the 1915 hurricane. And that was actually more destructive to Bolivar than Galveston, because Galveston had the seawall at that time. And at this point, they said there were 126 mile per hour winds. This time there were 61 people that rode out the storm inside. And this is when assistant keeper J.P. Brooks went up to the top, and they say that the lighthouse, it shook like a giant reed in the night. They say that it swayed back and forth. And at one point, the mechanism, the light, he was having to manually crank it by hand to keep the lens going until it was just no longer safe. And he had to come down, and they say at that point, the door had blown open, and they tied a rope around his waist to get and try to close the door. And people were having to climb up further in the stairwell from the storm surge and the rising water. And this was the only time in the history of the lighthouse that the light did not shine for 2 days. The oil room was washed away during the 1915 storm. The keeper's home, the assistant's crew home were heavily destroyed. And it's really interesting, David. I keep saying for the love of a lighthouse, the people that we keep meeting. But one of the gentlemen in my Rotary Club said, Amy, I have someone that you have to meet. We've got to have dinner. And I said, you bet. He said he has a connection to the lighthouse. And his name is Mr. Tickle. And he lives over in Galveston. He's 96 years old. And it turns out his grandfather was J.P. Brooks.
Oh, really?
So we had a great dinner. It was fascinating to listen to him talk about coming across the ferry boat and what it was like as his grandfather was assistant keeper of the lighthouse. He said there were huge Plymouth Rock chickens that roamed the property. And we actually have some pictures of the chicken coop houses and some of these pictures of the chicken coop. But I was asking about the 1915 storm, and then he said that his grandfather got a hernia from the 1915 hurricane and was never able to get over it. So it's just interesting, some of the people that we've been able to meet and be connected to. So after the 1915 storm and the destruction, it took 2 years to rebuild the homes.
To rebuild.
So these homes that you're in today, this is the keeper's home, were finished in 1917, so they're 106 years old this year. And so, after the 1915 storm, most everything it was demolished, it was destroyed. So it, again, took 2 years, and what you see today is the results of the rebuild after that 1915 storm. And so kind of the site, as in 1917, this is basically what you see here today.
Well, I think we're at a stopping point right now. Like I said, this is going to be a 4-week series, maybe 5-week even, but we're really going to dive in more into the history of the Bolivar Lighthouse and also how you can get involved with the Lighthouse, helping the rebuild. So, Amy, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
We'll be back next week with show 2 of maybe 5 on the Port Bolivar Lighthouse here in Bolivar Peninsula. Until next time, I'm David with Bolivar Live. Y'all have a great day, great week. Come see us. God bless, and bye-bye. The Big Store, located at 2385 Highway 87 in Crystal Beach, Texas, on Bolivar Peninsula. If you're on Bolivar Peninsula and you need anything, stop by the Big Store, where you'll be greeted by a staff of smiling faces and a staff that's eager to help you find what you're looking for. The Big Store is a fully stocked grocery store with fresh fruits and vegetables, meat department with hand-cut steaks, canned goods, dairy products, frozen foods, and beer and wine. The Big Store is also home to a gift shop, camping and fishing supplies, RV supplies, tools and hardware, and home goods, all under one roof. The Bolivar Peninsula Superstore, like they say, if the Big Store doesn't have it, chances are you really don't need it. For more information on the Big Store and their weekly sales ad, please visit www.thebigstore.us.